The power of banks is everywhere. Every day, banks increase their influence, even in the world's most beloved sport. The renovation of Real Madrid Stadium, the sale of Chelsea, Barcelona's debt, and even the creation of a super championship in Europe. Banks were involved in all these movements. Specifically, two major banks, JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. To them, football is still an untapped market, ready for ventures that will move billions in the coming years. In recent decades, football has ceased to be just entertainment and has become a money-making machine. It's no surprise that today, parents all over the world invest heavily in their children to become football players. To give you an idea, in 1980, a professional player in the English Championship earned an average of £25,000 per year. Today, the average salary is £3 million per year. And you don't have to go far to be shocked by the numbers. In just the last 10 years, clubs have tripled their spending on player transfers. Studies suggest that the more a club spends, the more points it earns in the world's top leagues. It's no wonder that clubs are increasingly seeking money, and that's where major sponsors, patrons, sheiks, and also banks come in, especially the two that control most of the negotiations in the major leagues, JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. Together, they hold over $5 trillion in assets, and if football is anything to go by, that figure will only grow. The billion-dollar renovation of Santiago Bernabeu, Real Madrid Stadium, was financed by JP Morgan and Merrill Lynch. The renovation of Barcelona's Camp Nou was financed by JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. The purchase of Manchester United by Jim Ratcliffe was financed by both, as was the purchase of Chelsea by Todd Boehly. And it's not just clubs that are targets. The Spanish league, La Liga, signed a deal to advance television revenues by selling part of the rights to CVC Capital Partners and also to JP Morgan. This agreement brought in €2 billion for the league and its clubs. In return, 88% of TV revenue for the next 50 years will go to the two investors. CVC also struck a similar deal with Ligue 1, the French league. In addition, the fund Sixth Street, led by former Goldman Sachs employees, also bought 10% of Barcelona's TV rights for the next 25 years for €200 million. And it won't stop there. Banks believe that football is still undervalued. Then this is where they will step in to make much more money. Today, the top 5 European leagues have the largest sports audiences, but make less money than the NFL. In 2024, 200 million people watched the Super Bowl, the NFL Final, on TV, while 3 times more watched El Clasico, the match between Real Madrid and Barcelona. But guess which one made more money? The Super Bowl. In this comparison, banks believe that football can generate much more money, which is why they are gradually acquiring the broadcasting rights to the leagues, as in the case of La Liga. At the same time, they're also lending money to teams to buy players. The goal is to strengthen the leagues with the best players to increase the perceived value of the tournaments, and then negotiate much higher prices for the rights at a negotiation table with banks present. There's also another point. The NFL circulates more money than the top European leagues, but in the bank's view, there's a key issue that contributes to this difference: the size of the stadiums. In the NFL, the average stadium capacity is 70,000 people, while in the English Premier League, it's 40,000. And it's not just about selling more tickets. The main problem is that today, stadiums, in general, cannot accommodate larger crowds than this number. And this is where banks come in again, financing grandiose renovations. An example of this is the renovation of Camp Nou, Barcelona Stadium, which will go from 99,000 seats to 110,000. Besides the stadium, the project will create a complete space called Espai Barca, which will be financed by 20 institutions, including JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. In the same vein, there was the recent renovation of Santiago Bernabeu, Real Madrid Stadium, which cost almost €900 million and was financed over 30 years by JP Morgan and also by Merrill Lynch. The renovation added only 3,000 new seats to Bernabeu, but it gained a complete structure for large-scale shows and events. And, of course, it generated debt with the banks. As expected, other clubs are also turning to or will turn to the same approach in the coming years, sending more and more money to the banks. Besides stadiums and TV rights, banks are also trying other ways to profit. One of them was the idea of creating the Super League, a championship with the top clubs in Europe, an idea that brought together Barcelona, Real Madrid, and Juventus but didn't prosper. Alongside future plans for the sport, banks are also actively involved in the purchase and sale negotiations of football clubs, as in the recent examples of Chelsea and Manchester United. In these billion-dollar negotiations, banks participate both as financiers of the buyers and as partners in the negotiations, finding buyers for the clubs. However, even in this field, J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs are also the main players in the negotiations. And although they theoretically act as impartial parties, banks can influence or block a negotiation, giving them power in this process as well. After all, they can influence the choice of a buyer simply by deciding whether or not to grant a loan. And you, do you think banks will dominate football? Share your thoughts with us in the comments.